48 Laws of Power, Chapter 40. Despise the free lunch. What is offered for free is dangerous. It usually involves either a risk, a trick, or a hidden obligation. What has worth is worth paying for. By paying your own way, you stay clear of gratitude, guilt, deceit. It is also often wise to pay the full price. There is no cutting corners with excellence. Be lavish with your money and keep it circulating, for generosity is a sign and a magnet for power. In the realm of power, everything must be judged by its cost, and everything has a place. What is offered for free or at a bargain rates often comes with a psychological price tag, complicated feelings of obligation, compromises with quality, the insecurity those compromises bring, and on and on. The powerful learn early to protect their most valuable resources, independence, and room to maneuver. By paying the full price, they keep themselves free of dangerous entanglements and worries. Being open and flexible with money also teaches the value of strategic generosity, a variation on the old trick of giving when you are about to take. By giving the appropriate gift, you put the recipient under obligation. Generosity softens people up to be deceived. By gaining a reputation for liberality, you win people's admiration while distracting them from your power plays. By strategically spreading your wealth, you charm the other countries, creating pleasure and making valuable allies. Look at the masters of pleasure, Caesars, the great Elizabeths, the Michelangelos, and the Medicis. Not a miser among them. Even the great con artists spread freely to swindle. Tight purse strings are unattractive when engaged in seduction. Casanova would give completely not only of himself, but of his wallet. The powerful understand that money is psychologically charmed and that it is also a vessel of politeness and sociability. This makes the human side of money a weapon in their armory. For everyone able to play with money, thousands more are locked in a self-destructive refusal to use money creatively and strategically. These types represent the opposite pole to the powerful, and you must learn to recognize them, either to avoid their poisonous natures, or to turn their inflexibility to your advantage. The greedy fish take the human side out of money. Cold and ruthless, they see only the lifeless balance sheet, viewing others solely as their pawns or obstructions in their pursuit of wealth. They trample on people's settlements and alienate valuable allies. No one wants to work with the greedy fish, and over the years they end up isolated, which often proves their undoing. Greedy fish are the con artists' bread and butter. Lured by the bait of easy money, they swallow the ruse hook, line, and sinker. They are easy to deceive, for they spend so much time dealing with numbers, not with people, that they become blind to psychology, including their own. Either avoid them before they exploit you, or play on their greed to your gain. The bargain demon. Powerful people judge everyone by what it costs, not just in money, but in time, dignity, peace of mind. And this is exactly what a bargain demon cannot do. Wasting valuable time digging for bargains They worry endlessly about what they could have gotten elsewhere for a little less. On the top of that, the bargain item they do buy is often shabby. Perhaps it needs costly repairs or will have to be replaced twice as fast as a high quality item. The cost of these pursuits, not always in money, through the price of a bargain is often deceptive, but in time and peace of mind, discourage normal people from undertaking them. But for the bargain demon, the bargain is an end in itself. These types might seem to harm only themselves, but their attitudes are contagious. Unless you resist them, they will infect you with the insecure feeling that you should have looked harder to find a cheaper price. Don't argue with them or try to change them. Just mentally add up the cost in time and inner peace, if not in hidden financial expenses of the irrational pursuit of a bargain. The sadists. Financial sadists play vicious power games with money as a way of asserting their power. They might, for example, make you wait for money that is owed you, promising you that the check is in the mail. Or, if they hire you to work for them, they meddle in every aspect of the job, haggling and giving you ulcers. Sadists seem to think that playing for something gives them the right to torture and abuse the seller. They have no sense of court element in money. If you are unlucky enough to get involved with this type, accept a financial loss may be better in the long run than getting entangled with this destructive power games. The indiscriminate giver. Generosity has a definite function and power. It attracts people, softens them up, makes allies out of them. But it has to be used strategically with a definite end in mind. Indiscriminate givers, on the other hand, are generous because they want to be loved and admired by all. And their generosity is so indiscriminate and needy that it may not have the desired effect. If they give to one and all, why should the recipient feel special? Attractive as it may seem to make an indiscriminate giver your mark, in any involvement with this type, you will often feel burdened by their insatiable emotional needs. After Francisco Pizarro conquered Peru in 1532, gold from Incan Empire began to pour into Spain, and the Spaniards of all classes started dreaming of the instant riches to be had in the New World. The story soon spread of an Indian chief to the east of Peru who once each year would ritually cover himself in gold dust and dive into a lake. Soon, word of mouth transformed El Dorado, the golden man, into an empire called El Dorado, wealthier than Incan, where the streets were paved and the buildings inland with gold. This elaboration of the story did not seem implausible, for surely a chief could afford to waste gold dust, and a lake must rule a golden empire. Soon Spaniards were searching for El Dorado all over northern South America. In February of 1541, the largest expedition yet in this venture, led by Pizarro's brother Gonzalo, left Quito in Ecuador. Resplendent in their rumors and colorful silks, 340 Spaniards headed east, along with 4,000 Indians to carry supplies and serve as scouts, 4,000 swine, dozens of llamas, and close to 1,000 dogs. But the expedition was soon hit by torrential rain, which rotted its gear and spoiled its food. Meanwhile, as Gonzalo Pizarro questioned the Indians they met along the way, those who seemed to be withholding information or who had not even heard of the fabulous kingdom. He would torture and feed to the dogs. Word of the Spaniards' murder spread quickly among the Indians, who realized that the only way to avoid Gonzalo's wrath was to make up stories about El Dorado and send him far away as possible. As Gonzalo and his men followed the lead the Indians gave them, then they were only led farther into the deep jungle. The explorer's spirit sagged. Their uniform long since shredded, their armor rusted, and they threw it away. Their shoes were torn into pieces, forcing them to walk barefoot. The Indian slaves they had set out with had either died or deserted them. They had eaten not only the swine, but the hunting dogs and llama. They lived on roots, and fruits. Realizing that they could not continue this way, Pizarro decided to risk river travel, and a barge was built out of rotting wood. But the journey down the treacherous Napo River proved no easier. Setting up camp on the river's edge, Gonzalo sent scouts ahead on the barge to find Indian settlements with food. He waited and waited for scouts to return, only to find out they had decided to desert the expedition and continue down the river on their own. The rain continued without end. Gonzalo's men forgot about El Dorado. They wanted only to return to Quito. Finally, in August of 1542, a little over 100 men from the expedition, originally numbering in the thousands, managed to find their way back. To the residents of Quito, they seemed to have emerged from hell itself, wrapped in tatter and skin, their bodies covered in sores, and so emaciated as to be unrecognizable. For over a year and a half, they had marched in an enormous circle, 2,000 miles by foot. The vast sums of money invested in the expedition had yielded nothing. No sign of El Dorado and no sign of gold. Even after Pizarro's disaster, the Spaniards launched expeditions after expedition in search of El Dorado. And like Pizarro, the conquistadors would burn and loot villages, torture Indians, endure imaginable hardships, and get no closer to gold. The money they spent on such expeditions cannot be calculated. Yet, despite the fertility of the search, the lure of the fantasy endured. Not only did the search for El Dorado cost millions of lives, both Indians and Spanish, it helped bring the ruin of the Spanish Empire. Gold became Spain's obsession. The gold that did find its way back to Spain, a lot did, was reinvested in more expeditions and the purchase of the luxurious rather than the agriculture or any other productive endeavor. While Spanish towns were depopulated as their menfolk left to hunt gold, farms fell into ruin, and the army had no recruits for its European war. By the end of the 17th century, the entire country had shrunk by more than half of its population. The city of Madrid had gone from a population of 400,000 to 150,000, with diminishing returns from its efforts over so many years. Spain fell into a decline from which it never recovered. Power requires self-discipline. The prospect of wealth, particularly easy, sudden wealth, plays havoc with the emotions. The suddenly rich believe that more is available possible. The free lunch, the money that will fall in your lap, is just around the corner. In this delusion, the greedy neglect everything. Powerful really depends on self-control, the goodwill of others, and so on. Understand, with one exception, death, no lasting change, and future comes quickly. Sudden wealth rarely lasts, for it is built on nothing solid. Never let lust for money lure you out of the protective and enduring fortress of real power. Make power your goal, and money will find its way to you. Leave El Dorado for suckers and fools. In the early 18th century, no one stood higher in English society than the Duke of Duchess and Marlborough. The Duke, having led successful campaigns against the French, was considered Europe's premier general strategist, and his wife, the Duchess, after much maneuvering, had established herself as a favorite Queen Anne, who became ruler of England in 1702. In 1704, the Duke's triumph and the Battle of Blenheim made him the toast of England, and to honor him, the Queen awarded him a much large plot of land in town of Woodstock, and the funds to create a great palace there. Calling his planned home the Palace of Blenheim, the Duke chose as his architect the young John Vanbrugh, a kind of Renaissance man who wrote plays as well as designed buildings. And so, construction began in the summer of 1705, with much fanfare and great hopes. Vanbrugh had a dramatic sense of architect. His palace was to be a monument to Marlborough's brilliance and power, and was to include artificial lakes and enormous bridges, elaborate gardens, and fantastical torches. From day one, however, the Duchess could not be pleased. She thought Vanbrugh was wasting money on yet another stand of trees. She wanted the palace finished as soon as possible. The Duchess tortured Vanbrugh and his workmen in every detail. She was consumed with petty matters. Although the government was paying for Blenheim, she counted every penny. Eventually, her grumbling about Blenheim and other things too created an irreparable rift between her and Queen Anne, who in 1711 dismissed her from the court, ordering her to vacate her apartments and the royal palace. When the Duchess left, fuming over the loss of her position and also her royal salary, she emptied the apartment of every fixture down to the brass doorknobs. Over the next 10 years, work in Blenheim would stop and start, and the funds became harder to procure from the government. The Duchess thought Vanbrugh was out to ruin her, so she quibbled over every carload of stone and bustle of lime, counted every extra yard of iron rails or foot of wainscot, hurling abuse at the wasteful workers, contractors, and surveyors. Marlborough, old and weary, wanted nothing but more than to settle into the palace in his last years. But the project began bogging down in a swamp of litigation, the workmen suing the Duchess for wages, the Duchess suing the architect right back. In the midst of this interminglable wrangling, the Duke died. He had never spent a night in his beloved Blenheim. After Marlborough's death, it became clear that he had a vast estate worth over $2 million, more than enough to pay for the finishing of the palace. But the Duchess would not relent. She held back Vanbrugh's wages as well as the workmen's, and finally had the architect dismissed. The man who took his place finished Blenheim in a few years, following Vanbrugh's designs to the letter. Vanbrugh died in 1726, locked out of the palace by the Duchess, unable to set foot in his greatest creation. Foreshadowing the Romantic movement, Blenheim had started a whole new trend in architect, but had given its creator a 20-year nightmare. For the Duchess of Marlborough, money was a way to play a sadistic power game. She saw the loss of money as a symbolic loss of power. With Vanbrugh, her contortions went deeper still. He was a great artist, and she envied his power to create and to attain fame outside her reach. She may not have had his gifts, but she did have the money to torture and abuse him over the pettiest details to ruin his life. This kind of sadism, however, bears an awful price. It's made constructions that should have lasted 10 years take 20. It poisoned many relationships, alienated the Duchess from the court, deeply pained the Duke, who wanted only to live peacefully in Blenheim, created endless lawsuits, and took years of Van Bur's life. Finally, too, posterity had the last words. Van Brun is recognized as a genius, while the Duchess is forever remembered for her consummate cheapness. The powerful must have a grandeur of spirit. They can never reveal any pettiness. And money is the most visible arena in which to display either grandeur or pettiness. Best spent freely then and create a reputation for generosity, which in the end will pay great dividends. Never let financial details blind you to the bigger picture of how people perceive you. Their resentment will cost you in the long run. And if you want to meddle in the work of the creative people under your hire, at least pay them well. Your money will buy their submission better than your displays of power. Petro Artino, son of lowly shoemaker, had catapulted himself into fame as a writer of biting satires. But like every Renaissance artist, he needed to find a patron who would give him a comfortable lifestyle while not interfering with his work. In 1528, Artino decided to attempt a new strategy in the patronage game. Leaving Rome, he established himself in Venice, where few had heard of him. He had a fair amount of money he had managed to save, but little else. Soon after he moved into his new home, however, he threw open its doors to the rich and poor, regaling them with banquets and amusement. He befriended each and every gondoler, tipping them royally in the streets. He spread his money liberally, giving it away to beggars, orphans, and washerwomen. Among the city's commoners, word quickly spread that Artino was more than just a great writer. He was a man of power and a kind of lord. Artists and men influenced soon began to frequent Artino's house. Within a few years, he made himself a celebrity. No visiting dignitary would think of leaving Venice without paying him a call. His generosity had cost him most of his savings, but had brought him influence and good name, and a cornerstone in the foundation of power. Since in Renaissance Italy, as everywhere else, the ability to spend freely was a privilege of the rich, the aristocracy thought Artino had to be a man of influence, since he spent money like one. And since the influence of a man's influence is worth buying, Artino became the recipient of all sorts of gifts and money. Dukes and duchesses, wealthy merchants and popes and princesses competed to gain his favor and showered him with all kinds of presents. Artino's spending habits, of course, were strategic, and the strategy worked like a charm. But for real money and comfort, he needed a great patron bottomless pocket. Having surveyed the possibilities, he eventually set his sights on the extremely wealthy Marquis of Montre and wrote an epic poem that he decided to call the Marquise. This was a common practice of writers looking for the patronage. In exchange for a dedication, they would get a small stipend, enough to write yet another poem, so that they spend their lives in a kind of constant servility. Artino, however, wanted power, not measly wage. He might dedicate a poem to the Marquis, but he would offer it to him as a gift, implying by doing so that he was not hired hack looking for a stipend, but he and the Marquis was equals. Artino's gift giving did not stop there. As a close friend of two of Venice's greatest artists, the sculptor Jacopo Cesavino and the painter Titan, he convinced these men to participate in his gift-giving scheme. Artino had studied the Marquis before going to work on him, and he knew his taste inside and out. He was able to advise Sir Sassanvino and Titan what subject matter would please the Marquis most. When he then sent a Sassino sculpture and a Titan painting to the Marquis as gifts from all three of them, the man was beside himself with joy. Over the next few months, Artino sent other gifts, swords, saddles, the glass that was Venetian specialty, things he knew the Marquis prized. Soon he, Titan, and Sassanvino began to receive gifts from the Marquis in return, and the strategy went further. When the son-in-law of a friend of Artino's found himself in jail, Mantinho Artino was able to get the Marquis to arrange his release. Artino's friend, a wealthy merchant, was a man of great influence in Venice. By turning the goodwill he had built up with Marquis to use, Artino had now brought this man's indebtedness too. And he, in turn, would help Artino when he could. The circle of influence was growing wider. Time and again, Artino was able to cash in on the immense political power of the Marquis, who also helped him in his many court romances. Eventually, however, the relationship began strain as Artino came to feel that the Marquis should have requited his generosity better. But he would not lower himself to begging or whining. Since the exchange of gifts between the two men had made them equals, it would not seem right to bring up money. He simply withdrew from the Marquis circle and hunted for other wealthy prey, settling first on the French King Francis, then in the Medicis, the Duke of Urbino, Emperor Charles V, and more. In the end, having many patrons meant he did not have to bow to any of them, and his power seemed incomparable to that of a great lord. Artino understood two fundamental properties of money. First, that it has to be circulated to bring power. What money should buy is not lifeless objects, but power over people. By keeping money in constant circulation, Artino brought an ever-expanding circle of influence that in the end more than compensated him for his expenses. Second, Artino understood the key property of the gift. To give a gift is to imply that you and the recipient are equals, and that the very least, or that you are the recipient's superior. A gift also involves an indebtedness or obligation when friends, for instance, offer you something for free. You can be sure that they expect something in return, and that to get it, they are making you feel indebted. The mechanism may or may not be entirely conscious on their part, but this is how it works. Artino avoided such encumbrance on his freedom. Instead of acting like a menial who expected the powerful to pay his way in life, he turned the whole dynamic around. Instead of being indebted to the powerful, he made the power indebted to him. This was the point of his gift giving, and a ladder that carried him into the highest social levels. By the end of his life, he had become the most famous writer in Europe. Understand, money may determine powerful relationships, but those relationships need not depend on the amount of money you have. They also depend on the way you use it. Powerful people give freely, buying influence rather than things. If you accept the inferior position because you have no fortune yet, you may find yourself in it forever. Play the trick that Artino played on Italy's aristocrats. Imagine yourself an equal. Play the Lord, giving freely. Open your doors, circulate your money, and create the facade of power, the facade of power through an alchemy that transforms money into influence. Soon after Baron James Rothschild made his fortune in Paris in the early 1820s, he faced his most intractable problem. How could a Jew and a German, a total outsider of French society, win the respect of the xenophobic French upper class? Rothschild was a man who understood power. He knew that his fortune would bring him status, but if that he remained socially alienated, neither his status nor his fortune would last. So he looked at the society of the time and asked what would win their hearts. Charity? The French could care less. Political influence? He already had that. And if anything only made people more suspicious of him, the weak spot he decided was boredom. In the period of restoration on the monarchy, the French upper class were bored. So Rothschild began to spend astonishing sums of money on entertaining them. He hired the best architects in France to design his gardens and ballroom. He hired the Marie Antoinette Carême, the most celebrated French chef, to prepare the most lavish parties Paris had ever witnessed. No Frenchman could resist. Even the parties were given by German Jew. Rothschild's weekly soirees began to attract bigger and bigger numbers. Over the next few years, he won only things that would secure an outsider's power: social acceptance. Strategic generosity is always a great weapon in building a support base, particularly for the outsiders. But the Baron de Rothschild was clever still. He knew it was his money that had created the barriers between him and the French, making him look ugly and untrustworthy. The best way to overcome this was literally to waste huge sums, a gesture to show he valued French culture and society over money. What Rothschild did resembled the famous potlatch feast of the American Northwest by periodically destroying its wealth in a giant orgy of festivals and bonfires, and Indian tribes would symbolize its power over other tribes. The base of its power was not money, but its ability to spend and its confidence in a superiority that would restore to it all the potlatch had destroyed. In the end, the Baron's soirees reflected his desire to mingle not just in France's business world, but in its society. By wasting money on his potlatches, he hoped to demonstrate that his power went beyond money into a more precious realm of culture. Rothschilds may have won social acceptance by spending money, but the support base he gained was that money alone could not buy. To secure his fortune, he had to waste it. That is strategic generosity in a nutshell, the ability to be flexible with your wealth, putting it to work, not to buy objects, but to win people's hearts. The Medicis of Renaissance Florence had built those immense power on their fortune that they had made in banking. But in Florence, centuries-old republic, that it was the idea that money bought power went against all the city's proud democratic values. Cosimo de' Medici, the first of the family to gain great fame, worked around this by keeping a low profile. He never flaunted his wealth. But by the time his grandson Lorenzo came of age in the 1470s, the family's wealth was too large and their influence too noticeable to be disguised any longer. Lorenzo solved the problem in his own way by developing the strategy of distraction that has served people of wealth ever since. He became the most illustrious patron of the arts that history had ever known. Not only did he spend lavishly on paintings, he created Italy's finest apprentice school for young artists. It was in one of these schools that the young Michelangelo first caught the attention of Lorenzo, who invited the artist to come and live in his house. He did the same to Leonardo da Vinci. Once under his wing, Michelangelo and Leonardo requited his generosity by becoming loyal artists in his stable. Whoever Lorenzo faced an army, he would wield the weapon of patronage. When Pisa, Florence, traditionally enemy, threatened to rebel against it in 1472, Lorenzo placated its people by pouring money into its university, which had once been its pride and joy, but had long ago lost its luster. The Pisans had no defense against this insidious maneuver, which simultaneously fed their love of culture and blunted their desire for battle. Lorenzo undoubtedly loved the arts, but his patronage of the arts had a practical function as well, of which he was keenly aware. In Florence at the time, banking was perhaps the least admired way of making money, and was certainly not a respected source of power. The arts were at the other pole, the pole of quasi-religious, transcendent. By spending on the arts, Lorenzo diluted people's opinions of the ugly source of his wealth, disguising himself in nobility. There is no better use of strategic generosity than that of distracting attention from unsavory reality and wrapping oneself in the mantle of the art of religion. Louis XIV had an eagle eye for the strategic power of money. When he came to throne, the powerful nobility had recently proven a thorn in the monarch's side. He seethed with rebelliousness, so he impoverished these aristocrats by making them spend enormous sums of maintaining their position in the court, making them dependent on royal largesses for their liveliness. He had them in his claws. Next, Louis brought the nobles to their knees with strategic generosity. It would work like this. Whenever he noticed a stubborn court whose influence he needed to gain, or whose troublemaking he needed to squelch, he would use his vast wealth to soften the soil. First, he would ignore his victims, making the man anxious. Then the man would suddenly find that his son had been given a well-paid post, and that funds had been spent liberally in his home region, or that he had given a painting he had long coveted. Presents would flow from Louis's hand. Finally, weeks or months later, Louis would ask for the favor he had needed all along. A man who had once vowed to do anything to stop the king would find he had lost the desire to fight. A straightforward bribe would have made him rebellious. This was far more insidious. Facing hardening earth in which nothing could take roots, Louis loosened the soil before he planted his seed. Louis understood that there is a deep-rooted emotional element in our attitude to money, an element going back to childhood. When we are children, all kinds of complications, feelings about our parents center around gifts. We see the giving of a gift as a sign of love and approval, and that emotional element never goes away. The recipients of gifts, financial and otherwise, are suddenly as vulnerable as children, especially when the gifts come from someone in authority. They cannot help opening up. Their will is loosened as Louis loosened the soil. To succeed best, the gift should come out of the blue. It should be remarkable for the fact that a gift like it has never been given before, or for being preceded by a cold shoulder from the giver. The more often you give the particular people, the blunter this weapon becomes. What this weapon becomes. If they don't take your gifts for granted, becoming monsters of ingratitude, they will resent what appears to be charity. The sudden, unexpected, one-time gift will not spoil your children. It will keep them under your thumb. The antique dealer, Fushimiya, who lived in the city of Edo, former name of Tokyo, in the 17th century, once made a stop at a village tea house. After enjoying a cup of tea, he spent several minutes scrutinizing the cup, which he eventually paid for and took away with him. A local artisan, watching this, waited until Fushima left the shop, then approached the old woman who owned the tea house and asked her who was this man. She told him it was a Japanese famous connoisseur, antique dealer to the Lord of Zemo. The artisan ran out of the shop, caught up with Fushima, and begged him to sell him the cup, which must clearly be valuable if Fushima judged it so. Fushima laughed heartily. It's just an ordinary cup of bison ware, he explained, and it is not valuable at all. The reason I was looking at it was that the stem seemed to hang about it strangely, and I wonder if there wasn't a leak somewhere. Devotees of the tea ceremonies were interested in odd and accidental beauty in nature. Since the artisan still seemed so excited about it, Fushimiya gave him the cup for free. The artisan took the cup around, trying to find an expert who would appraise it at a high price. But since all of them recognized it as an ordinary teacup, he got nowhere. Soon he was neglecting his own business, thinking only of the cup and the fortune it would bring. Finally, he went to Edo to talk to Fushima at his shop. There, the dealer, realizing that he had inadvertently caused this man's pain by making him believe the cup had great worth, paid him 100 gold pieces for the cup as a kindness. The cup was indeed mediocre, but he wanted to rid the artisan of his obsession while allowing him to feel that his effort had not been wasted. The artisan thanked him and went on his way. Soon word spread of Fushima's purchase of the teacup. Every dealer in Japan clamored for him to sell it, since a cup he had brought for 100 ryo must be worth much more. He tried to explain the circumstances in which he had bought the cup, but the dealer could not be dissuaded. Fushima finally relented and put the cup up for sale. During the auction, the two buyers simultaneously bid 200 ryo for the teacup and then began to fight over who had bid first. Their fighting tipped over a table, and the teacup fell into the ground and broke into several pieces. The auction was clearly over. Fushima glued and mended the cup, then stored it away, thinking the affair finished. Years later, however, the great tea master, Mastudari Fatima, visited the store and asked to see the cup, when by then had become legendary. Fumo examined it as a piece. He said, it is not up to much, but tea master prizes sentiments and associate more than intrigue value. He bought the cup for a high sum and glued together work of less than ordinary craftsmanship had become one of the most famous objects in Japan. The story shows first an essential aspect of money. This is that humans who have created it and humans who instill it with meaning and value. Second, with objects as money, the quarter must values are the settlements, emotions embedded in them. These are what makes them worth having. The lesson is, the more your gifts and your acts of generosity played with sentiment, the powerful they are. The object or concept that plays with a charged emotion of or hence a chord of sentiments has more power than money. You squander or own an expensive yet lifeless present. Akimo Suso. Akimo Susotomo, a wealthy adherent of the tea ceremony, once gave his page 100 gold pieces and instructed him to purchase a tea bowl offered by a particular dealer. When the page saw the bowl, he doubted it was worth that much, and after much bargaining, got the price reduced to 95 gold pieces. Days later, Susutomo had put the bowl to use. The page probably told him what he had done. What an ignoramus you are, replied Susutomo.